Snow is not my favorite, and it's taken me a long time to get comfortable with. Today, I'm going to share 10 tips I've learned for staying safe and warm in the snow. Hey everybody, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. I know a lot of people who love snow, and I am not one of them. At best, I've made my peace with it. Sometimes I do enjoy it. I like how pretty it is, and I like seeing all the animal tracks, but I don't relish the idea of stomping around in it, because usually it means I'm going to be cold and my hands are going to hurt. That said, it'd be a real bummer to be stuck inside during the entire snowy season. And especially come February, I want to see the sun any chance I get. So thankfully, I've learned some things that have made functioning in snow a lot easier for me. And these are the tips that I want to pass on to you today. Everything from choosing the right gear to gaining some weight. More on that later. If I can make my peace with snow, I think you can too. And at the end of the day, you'll have more opportunities to get outside and enjoy the outdoors. Before we get into it, if you would be so kind, please take a moment to rate this podcast 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening on, follow the podcast, and share an episode with a friend. All of these things will help the podcast grow and help more people get outside and into hunting, which is what Persistence Outdoors is all about. So thank you to everybody who does follow the podcast. I appreciate your support. And let's get into our topic for today. All right, so tip number 1 is super simple, and that is don't get wet. When I was a kid, I remember going up to Mount Rainier with my family to get a Christmas tree in December. And we were all packed into a big Suburban. We drove up these logging roads and it was snowy everywhere. It was gorgeous, but it was a long drive. And being, 6 to 8 years old, I was getting antsy. And so once we finally stopped in an area with all these beautiful trees, the first thing I did when I got out of the car was jumped into a snowdrift and make a snow angel. And that is about the last thing you want to do at the beginning of a winter outing. So I jumped into this snowdrift, made my snow angel. It was a wonderful 15 seconds, got up, and I was completely wet. I had snow around my neck. At the time, I couldn't have weighed more than 40 pounds. And for the next 6 hours, I was completely miserable because I was freezing cold. We also had this happen all the time when I was in Boy Scouts as a kid, where the new scouts, we would get to our destination, the new scouts would pile out of the car and they would start having a snowball fight. And we always had to tell them to stop because it's not just a comfort thing, it's also a danger thing when you get wet. So don't get wet. If you're going to have a snowball fight or do something silly in the snow, wait till the last day or wait till you're coming out, because anytime you're wet in the snow, you are going to be cold. You can also get wet by sweating just from activity. So if you're hiking hard and you're wearing lots of layers and you sweat, well, it's fine when you're hiking, but once you stop in those cold temperatures, that sweat is going to chill you immediately. And it can even be dangerous, like I said, to be wet in the cold. Another way to keep yourself from getting wet is to bring a second pair of socks. So your feet sweat all the time pretty much. And sometimes you don't really notice it, but you will start to notice it in the cold. Having a second pair of dry socks that you can put on will keep you much more comfortable and happy. So overall, don't do anything silly in the snow. Make sure to pace yourself so that you don't get too sweaty, and always bring a second pair of dry socks. My second tip will also help you not get wet and manage your temperature in general, and that is to layer up. I recently did an episode about this, episode 60, how to layer for hunting and hiking. And this is just such an important outdoor skill to learn. So, layering will allow you to adjust your temperature for different activity levels. So, when you're hiking, again, you don't want to sweat very much. So, it's best to have less clothing on when you're hiking. But when you stop and you're still, all of a sudden you're going to cool down. And so, it's a good idea to have some sort of insulating layer that you can put on to keep you warm. So it's really important to dial in your layering system. And most people will use something along the lines of this. First, they will have a next to skin base layer. This will usually be wool or synthetic. Then they will have some sort of insulating layer. This could be fleece. This could be down. It could be something else, also wool. And then they will have a hard outer layer. And when I say hard, I just mean it will protect you from the elements like rain and snow. And if you have those three layers, you can kind of adjust the thicknesses of those layers and have a very versatile system overall. So then when you're out in the snow, you can start hiking and maybe only be wearing your base layer on top. And then when you stop, you throw on that insulation layer. And then if the weather starts getting snowy or even rainy in that nasty like 33 to 35 degree zone, you can then put on your shell and that will keep you protected from the elements. When you're choosing layers, it's helpful to understand the different qualities of materials like down, synthetics, and wool. You'll find a whole lot of outdoor clothing made with these materials. So down is well known for being one of the warmest materials that we have for insulation. It will keep you very warm. However, if it gets wet, it will lose its loft. And it also isn't breathable. So if you were in a rainstorm and you were wearing your down, it would likely get wet and then not keep you warm anymore, and it doesn't dry out very quickly. Or if you're wearing down to stay warm as you're hiking, it's going to trap in a lot of moisture, and that can make you wet and also defeat the purpose of wearing that insulation layer. Now, synthetics cover quite a broad range of different materials, but generally synthetics are going to be inexpensive, they are going to be lightweight, and synthetic insulation can get wet and still keep you somewhat warm because it won't completely lose its loft. And then once it gets wet, it will also dry out much more quickly than untreated down. So synthetics are a great option for all sorts of different types of outdoor clothing. They can be for your next to skin layer that wicks away moisture and therefore keeps your skin feeling more dry and warm. And they can also be for your outer layer, right? The hard shell that keeps the rain off of you. If you want an insulation layer, that could be like a fleece, and that would be synthetic as well. Now, the one thing that I don't like about synthetics is that they can smell really bad. Your next to skin layer with synthetics often smells bad after you wear it and sweat in it once. So not all synthetics are that way, but especially cheap ones that I've worn are. And so for my next to skin layers, I would much rather use wool. Wool has antimicrobial properties, and that helps to keep it odor free. Now, wool can be a little bit heavier than synthetics, and it is not as cheap and usually not as durable, but it does stay odor free and it can still keep you warm when wet. And I like the fact that it's a natural and renewable resource. All right, my third tip for you is to drink water. In the cold, we experience reduced thirst signaling, which means our bodies just don't feel as thirsty in the cold. And also cold usually means dry air. So These two things make it very easy to get dehydrated when you're out in the snow. So you really have to pay attention to drinking water. So, first of all, you have to have water available, and you need to make sure that your water doesn't freeze in those cold conditions. So, one way to do that is to use an insulated water bottle of some kind. Maybe it's a thermos in really cold conditions. Maybe it's just a Nalgene that has that thick plastic that can provide some insulation and make sure your water doesn't freeze. You can also just pour warm water into your water reservoirs when you're going out. And that way, it will take a longer time to cool down and therefore not freeze, right? If you are planning to convert snow into water, you need to prepare for that too. Snow is largely air, right? And so it's actually a very long process to get enough drinking water from snow. So you need a serious stove that can create a lot of heat. You need a big pot, and you need to be prepared to spend a lot of time melting snow. Now, when it comes to actually drinking, I always find that it's easier to drink flavored drinks than it is to drink straight water. So if you're just trying to stay hydrated, getting something like liquid IV and putting that in your water can really help to make you actually want to drink in the first place. And there's all sorts of different drink mixes. You can choose your favorite one, and that can help you maintain your fluids even when you normally wouldn't want to drink water. Now, a final tip to keep yourself from getting dehydrated is to breathe through your nose. If you don't breathe through your nose normally, this is going to feel weird, but I encourage you to start practicing it. Breathing through your nose will help you lose less water. And over the course of many miles hiking in snow, it can actually make a huge difference. Also, breathing through your nose may help you regulate your pace. You might not go as fast, but that also might help you not sweat as much and therefore stay warm. So breathing through your nose has all sorts of benefits, but a big one is just not losing as much water through your breath. My next tip, just like drinking water, is to eat a lot of food. When you're out in the snow and in cold weather, your body is working overtime to keep you warm, and therefore you are burning lots of calories. So you have to eat more food. And again, this can be a little bit challenging. Sometimes you just don't think about it, but you've got to make sure to increase your caloric intake in order to stay warm. I find this is especially true before I go to sleep. If I go to bed on an empty stomach, I'm likely to be much colder than if I load up on some cookies or something else before I go to bed. Often, just like I was talking about with the water, sometimes it's hard to eat the foods that you would normally eat. So if you just need to stay warm, you might bring some more snack type foods or a little bit more palatable foods that you're going to enjoy eating even when it's cold. Now, I know this isn't, best for your long-term diet, but sometimes you just need to stay warm and stay safe in the snow. Now, here's a second tip or a second part of this, and I'm completely serious. You may need to gain some weight. If you're a very small person, you may need to gain some weight in order to regulate your body temperature in the snow. I know this because I used to be a cross-country boy and I was very thin and I always had problems staying warm in the snow. And it wasn't until I stopped cross-country and had been in college for a few years and started building some muscle that I was able to actually regulate my temperature in cold conditions. And this actually makes sense for two reasons. First of all, smaller people actually have a larger surface area compared to their total body mass than larger people. And then secondly, muscle helps increase your metabolism. And so if you have more muscle, it can actually help to keep you warm. And so if you're small, or even if you're not small, but you're just under muscled, it may help to gain some good weight. Okay, tip number 5 is to recognize emergencies. When you're in the snow, there's two major things that could happen. One is hypothermia, and another is frostbite. So, hypothermia is just getting too cold, getting dangerously cold. And hypothermia can be identified early on by the umbles. The umbles are grumbles, fumbles, mumbles, and stumbles. So if someone is starting to grumble, as in they're getting grumpy and complaining about being cold, that is one of the first signs. Then there's the fumbles. So as someone is getting colder and colder, their body is going to move blood away from their extremities, and it's going to be harder for them to do normal things with their hands. So they may start to fumble things as they're trying to tie their shoes or pick up their water bottle or whatever it is. Then you've got the mumbles. The mumbles are when they are talking, they're having a hard time getting normal words out. So they're slurring their speech or they're just mumbling, and you're having a hard time understanding what they're saying. And then finally, you've got the stumbles. So stumbles is just like it sounds, tripping, falling unexpectedly. And all of these four umbles are a good sign that the person is experiencing hypothermia or headed towards hypothermia. Now, the second emergency is frostbite. And frostbite starts with cold skin, maybe a tingling or numb feeling. And you know it's starting to get bad when the skin turns white or grayish and it starts to feel hard or stiff. So frostbite can be dangerous because it can actually kill the tissue in your extremities or wherever you get frostbite. And so you need to notice it before it sets in so deep that it's actually damaging your tissue. Now, it's kind of funny because as a kid, I feel like I experienced these symptoms all the time, and not just being out in snow, but even at like baseball practice on a rainy day where I would get to the car and my hand would literally not work. I survived, but it's good to watch out for these things and understand the early warning signs so that you can take action and remedy them before they become a bigger issue. Especially if you're going to be out somewhere for a couple days, it's important to take care of these things right away so that you don't get into a dangerous situation. So for both hypothermia and frostbite, if someone is wet, you need to remove the wet clothing and get them into dry clothing. You want to warm them up slowly. You don't want to do it too aggressively and quickly. And then for frostbite, make sure not to rub the affected area, because if there are ice crystals forming in their tissue, rubbing can actually create more damage. So try to warm them up slowly. Make sure to get any of that wet clothing off. And if it's a real emergency, you may need to call someone to help extract that person as soon as possible. Tip number 6 is one that some people wouldn't expect, and that is to wear sun protection. When you're out in a snowy environment, you can actually get sunburned pretty bad. Because if it's a clear day, obviously you can get sunburned from the sun, but also you can get sun reflecting up off the snow and hitting you at another angle. So I've heard stories of people getting sunburned on the roof of their mouth before because they were hiking with their mouth open, and it was a hot sunny day and just blistered the roof of their mouth. That sounds awful. I've never experienced that, but I've certainly got sunburned on my face. And it's kind of unexpected on a cold day, but it is highly probable. Another thing that can happen is snow blindness. And this is when part of your eyeball actually gets sunburned. And that could be dangerous in all sorts of ways. What if you're way up on a mountain somewhere and you get snow blindness and you can't come down? So it's very important to both wear sun protection on your skin and also to wear sunglasses. The most common place that you're going to get sunburned is your face, obviously, because that is most often exposed. So some sunscreen on your face is a good idea. Some sunglasses. They make glacier glasses, which look kind of dorky, but they have protection on the bottom and sides of the sunglasses as well to block out that glare from the snow. So those aren't a bad idea, or some sort of like ski goggle just to give you that extra protection. And then, of course, wear a hat to protect your neck, or wear some more sunscreen or a gaiter. And just be conscious of it, because even though it's cold, you can still get sunburned, and you can get sunburned really bad. All right, tip number 7 is to choose the right footwear and socks. For socks, I always recommend wool. Wool will keep you warm even when your feet get a little bit wet. They are great at wicking moisture away from your foot to help keep you warm once again. And they are also very comfortable. They don't smell that bad. I recommend that you go get some wool socks. For your boots, you can choose between all sorts of different types of boots, but I think there are 2 clear winners. So first are pack boots. Pack boots are made for walking on snow. They've got a rubber lower, which is completely waterproof, and then a flexible but very tall upper, sometimes made out of leather or some sort of synthetic. And so pack boots are a great option. Usually they're insulated, and sometimes pack boots will have a removable liner. So you can remove that insulating liner if it gets wet, and you can dry that out separately. And that can help you be able to use your pack boots day after day. Now, another great option is just your normal leather hiking boots. Maybe a taller hiking boot or an insulated hiking boot would be better, but your leather hiking boots with a little bit of snow seal or something to help them shed the water can be a great way to go. And for most people who are trying to hunt year-round or hike year-round, I'm going to recommend to them a 6 to 8 inch tall uninsulated leather boot. And then in the winter, they can wear, a thicker pair of socks to stay a little bit warmer. They can treat their leather with snow seal to keep it nice and waterproof. And then in the summer, they can wear a lighter pair of socks, and they don't need to worry so much about making their boots waterproof. Now, sometimes if you have an uninsulated pair of boots, you need it to be warmer. And so some people try wearing 2 pairs of socks. And I just want to caution you with this. Wearing 2 pairs of socks sometimes backfires. So what happens is you put on 2 pairs of socks, and then you stuff them into your boot, and there's just not enough room in your boot. And then you tighten down your boot, and you go out and you walk around. But all of that sock and your tight boot cuts off your blood circulation, and that can actually make your feet colder than if you just wore 1 pair of socks and had good circulation. So keep that in mind. And this is actually something you should probably think about when you're buying the boot. I would just start by testing the boot with a very thick pair of socks on. And that way, you have some room for a little bit more insulation. And then at other times of year, you can just tighten your boot down. If you choose to wear leather hiking boots, and especially shorter hiking boots, you can always use a pair of gaiters to help increase the waterproofness of those boots. So gaiters cover the lower part of your leg, and they will cover the opening of the top of your boots. And so if you get tall gaiters, you can put them over your boots, and you'll actually be good in snow up to your knees, because no snow will be able to get into the top of your boots. And that's usually where you're getting wet when you're hiking in snow, is when you punch through the snow and then pull your leg out, and all the snow is just sitting at the top of your boot and then melting from your body heat. And that sucks. So a pair of gaiters can really increase the versatility of your medium height hiking boots. Tip number 8 is related to footwear, and the tip is to get some traction. So when you're hiking in the snow, it may be icy, and just generally it helps to have a little bit more grip on your shoes. So this might be some yak tracks, which are just these little cables that you can strap to your shoes. They give you a little bit more traction. It might be crampons or micro spikes in more serious scenarios. And then I'm also going to include in this category snowshoes. Snowshoes usually have a built-in crampon, and they can also help you walk on light and unpacked snow. So that can be a huge benefit as well. Sometimes I really don't enjoy hiking in the snow because you will just be walking along, punching through that top layer. And if you've ever done that on a dirt road, for example, where there wasn't a whole lot of snow, what happens is you walk along and you punch through that top layer, and then you just slam your leg into the frozen road below. And that's really uncomfortable. So having some sort of snowshoe can be a huge advantage, even on surfaces that are fairly hikeable. And then finally, along with traction on your shoes are trekking poles. Trekking poles are just going to help you keep your balance. Sometimes you might be punching through snow and you don't know what's beneath you, and that can make you fall or stumble. So having a third point of contact or a fourth point of contact is just going to make life so much easier. I remember last year I was hiking in the winter on a very steep slope, and it was also covered in deadfall. And I was kind of coming down the side of the slope that was as steep as something you would ski on. And I was just sliding in the snow, and then I would hit something, and then I would fall. And then I would slide and hit something and fall. And it would have been really nice to have some trekking poles in that scenario. All right, tip number 9 is to dial in your sleep system. There's nothing worse than being cold throughout the night on a winter camping trip. And also, sometimes when you're hunting and hiking in the winter, your sleeping bag is part of your emergency plan to stay warm. And so whether you're going out planning to sleep overnight, or if you just have a sleeping bag in case of an emergency, it's important for it to work either way. So one thing to remember about sleeping bags is that they are usually given 2 temperature ratings. And often, especially for men's sleeping bags, the temperature rating that will be advertised is the limit rating, not the comfort rating. So there's the comfort rating, which comes from a standardized test, and it's assuming that someone could be comfortable in the sleeping bag when the ambient temperature is around that comfort rating temperature. And then there's the limit, and the limit does not mean you will be comfortable, but it means you will be safe. And so if you go and you're looking for a sleeping bag and you see, let's say, a 32-degree sleeping bag, well, that's likely the limit rating. And if you go and use it in 32-degree weather, you are going to be very cold and uncomfortable. So if you're buying a sleeping bag, look for both of those ratings, figure out what the actual comfort rating is, and then if you know you're going to be doing a lot of winter camping, maybe down at the 20 degrees level, make sure that that comfort rating is at or below around 20 degrees or whatever temperature it is for you. Now, just as important as your sleeping bag in the winter and on snow is your sleeping pad. When you're sleeping in your sleeping bag, you're actually compressing that layer of insulation below you. And so it doesn't do a whole lot for you compared to the insulation that's above you that is all lofty. And so you actually need something between you and the snow to protect you from losing all your heat to the snow or to the cold ground below you. So in the winter, it's very important to have an insulated sleeping pad. And you can do this a couple ways. You can buy an inflatable sleeping pad that has built-in insulation. It will have an R value. And for winter camping, it's best to have something with an R value in the 4 to 5 range, ideally. Now, if you have a sleeping pad that you like, but it's not insulated, you can always go and get a cheap foam pad, kind of like a yoga mat, and use that. And you can just stack those pads together. And that blue pad or yoga mat will do a very good job of protecting you from losing heat to the ground. Now, I have found with inflatable sleeping pads sometimes that I need to put the blue pad on top of the inflatable sleeping pad, and that's slightly less comfortable, but in my opinion, it's much preferable to just having the cold air circulating through that uninsulated inflatable sleeping pad right under where I'm sleeping. A couple related tips before we move on from sleeping systems. One is that you need to remember that your sleeping bag only traps heat. It doesn't create heat. So if you go into your sleeping bag pretty cold, it's going to take you longer to warm up. One way that you can get in your sleeping bag and be warm much quicker is to do some exercise before you get in. So work up some extra body heat and then get in your sleeping bag, and that will help you warm up quicker. Sleeping bags are also useful for drying out gear. So if you have anything that's gotten wet, wring it out as best you can, but then you can bring it in your sleeping bag with you, and as your body generates heat, it will help to dry out whatever's wet. This is helpful with small articles of clothing. I've even taken my boots before and put them in a plastic bag and then put them in a sleeping bag with me. And that way they don't freeze overnight. So putting things in your sleeping bag can be an effective strategy to dry things out or to keep things warm. Just make sure you don't overdo it and end up making yourself cold or making your sleeping bag completely wet and therefore putting you in danger. Tip number 10 is to plan ahead. And if you've made it this far, I think you already are. But like I said in the beginning, the stakes are higher when it's snowy out. And so you just need to take a couple extra precautions. You should definitely check the weather and make sure that there's nothing extreme blowing in. You should always bring your 10 essentials. If you don't know what those are, go check out episode 18. It's called the 10 Essentials, Not Just for Boy Scouts. The 10 Essentials are going to help keep you safe in emergency situations. And then finally, you should always tell someone where you're going, especially in the snow where you could get hypothermia, you could get trapped by weather, you could lose your way. It's important for someone to know where you're going and when you expect to be back. And so if something happens to you, they can come looking for you sooner than later. So just plan ahead, use some common sense, take a little bit extra care, and you will be ready to have a great time in the snow. All right, guys. Well, I hope this has been helpful for you. And maybe if you're like me and you don't love the snow, hopefully this makes you feel a little more confident to venture out this winter. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. You can email me at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com, or you can message me on the Persistence Outdoors Instagram. I know this episode will be coming out right before Christmas, so to everybody who's listening, Merry Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful holiday, and I will catch you on the next one.